which is IC 879, which is itself distorted into an S shape by the interaction. It's really, really teensy on there. I don't know if you can even see it. NGC 5101 and NGC 5078 are approximately 800,000 light years apart in the sky, and they're only half a degree from each other. Both galaxies are believed to be about the size of the Milky Way. NGC 3242 is a planetary nebula. It was thought to look like a smaller, paler version of the planet Jupiter, so it was given the name the Ghost of Jupiter. And it's also known as the Eye Nebula, and it does sort of look like a cat's eye, doesn't it? In small telescopes, it's a pale blue disk, 0.42 by 0.42 arc minutes in diameter. Sir William Herschel discovered this nebula on February 7, 1785. Its magnitude is 9, which is fairly bright, and there are a few faint galaxies in this field, but they're only magnitude 16 and less than half an arc minute across. This is a Hubble image, and it shows the inner and outer shells and the central star, which is magnitude 11, and about 25 times as luminous as our sun. Estimates of its diameter range from 1,900 light years to 3,500 light years, but it is undoubtedly one of the nearest planetaries to us. Corvus the Crow has 54 deep sky objects, packing a whole lot into this tiny little constellation. Corvus really has a lot to crow about. Okay. Most of the objects are galaxies, and most of them are really small and faint, and they're mostly crowded into the western part of the constellation. Did you know that crows used to be white? An indigenous legend tells us why they are now black. One day, a crow and a hawk hunted together in the bush. After traveling together for some time, they decided to hunt in opposite directions, and at the close of the day, to share whatever game they had caught. The crow traveled against the sun, and at noonday, he arrived at a broad lagoon, which was the home of the wild ducks. The crow hid in the tall green reeds fringing the lagoon and prepared to trap the ducks. First, he got some white clay, softened it with water, and placed 2 pieces in his nostrils. Then he took a long piece of hollow reed through which he could breathe underwater, and finally he tied a net bag around his waist in which to place the ducks. On the still surface of the lagoon, the tall trees were reflected like a miniature forest. The ducks, with their bronze plumage glistening in the sun, were swimming among the clumps of reeds, and only paused to dive for a tasty morsel hidden deep in the water weeds. The crow placed the reed in his mouth, and without making any sound, waded into the water. He quickly submerged himself, and the only indication of his presence in the lagoon was a piece of dry reed, which projected above the surface of the water and through which the crow was breathing. When he reached the center of the water hole, he remained perfectly still. He did not have to wait long for the ducks to swim above his head. Then, without making any sound, he seized one by the leg, quickly pulled it under the water, killed it, and placed it in the net bag. By doing this, he did not frighten the other ducks, and in a short time, he had trapped a fair number of them. He then left the lagoon and continued on his way until he came to a river. The crow was so pleased with his success at the water hole that he decided to spear some fish before he returned to the camp. He left the bag of ducks on the bank of the river, and taking his fish spear, he waded into the river until the water reached his waist. Then he stood very still with the spear poised for throwing. A short distance from the spot where he was standing, a slight ripple disturbed the calm surface of the water. With the keen eye of the hunter, he saw the presence of fish, and with a swift movement of his arm, he hurled the spear, and his unerring aim was rewarded with a big fish. The water was soon agitated by many fish, and the crow took advantage of this to spear many more. With this heavy load of game, he turned his face toward home. The hawk was very unfortunate in his hunting. He stalked a rabbit many miles and then lost sight of it in the thickly wooded hills. He then decided to try the river for some fish, but the crow had made the water muddy and frightened the fish, so again he was unsuccessful. At last, the hawk decided to return to his home with the hope that the crow had secured from food, which they had previously agreed to share. When the hawk arrived, he found that the crow had been there before him and had prepared and eaten his evening meal. He at once noticed that the crow had failed to leave a share for him. This annoyed the hawk, so he approached the crow and said, "I see you have had a good hunt today. I walked many miles but could not catch even a lizard. I am tired and would be glad to have my share of food, as we agreed this morning." "You are too lazy," the crow replied. "You must have slept in the sun instead of hunting for food. Anyhow, I've eaten mine and cannot give you any." This made the hawk very angry, and he attacked the crow. For a long time, they struggled around the dying embers of the campfire until the hawk seized the crow and rolled him in the black ashes. When the crow recovered from the fight, he found that he could not wash the ashes off, and since that time, crows have always been black. The crow was also punished for hiding the food which he could not eat by being condemned to live forever on carrion. The biggest and best one constellation in Corvus is M104, also known as the Sombrero Galaxy. Its magnitude is 8, and it measures 8.4 by 4.9 arc minutes, so it's easy to see with a small telescope, or even binoculars if you have a really good dark sky. M104 has a bright nucleus, an unusually large central bulge, and a prominent dust lane in its outer disk, which from Earth is viewed almost edge-on. The dark dust lane and the bulge give it the appearance of a sombrero hat, which is how it gets its name. This galaxy was discovered on May 11, 1781 by Pierre Marchand. We also have a nice little planetary nebula in our crow, NGC 4361. It's also known as the Lawn Sprinkler Nebula or the Garden Sprinkler Nebula, and it does kind of look like that, doesn't it? Its magnitude is 13, and it measures 1.05 by 1.05 arc minutes. So you can find it with a telescope as small as 6 inches. For sure, you'll be able to see it with your 8-inch dog. NGC 4038 and NGC 4039 are called the antenna galaxies. They are interacting and colliding with each other, and the two long tails of stars, gas, and dust that are being ejected from the galaxies supposedly look like insects' antennae. I don't see it, maybe you do. Within 400 million years, the antenna's nuclei will collide and form a single galaxy. The magnitude of these is 13.6, and they measure 5.36 by 2.73 arc minutes. Crater the Cup covers an area 282 square degrees, and it's the 53rd largest constellation, just in case you were keeping. The brightest star is magnitude 3.6, and for some reason it's labeled Delta, which would make one think it's the 4th brightest star in the constellation, but it's actually brighter than Alpha, Beta, and Gamma. Don't ask me why, I don't know. Crater has 116 deep sky objects. They're all galaxies, the brightest of which is only 9th magnitude. Here, we're looking away from the plane of our galaxy into intergalactic space. So that accounts for the large number of galaxies that we see here. The Virgo cluster is just to the north of Corvus and Crater. NGC 3511 is magnitude 11.63, and it measures 6.04 by 2 arc minutes. It's located about 45 million light years from Earth, and it's about 70,000 light years across. It was discovered by William Herschel on December 21st, 1786, and you can see it 2 degrees west of Beta. NGC 3511 forms a pair with NGC 3513, which is 10.5 arc minutes away. The two galaxies form a small group that's known as the NGC 3511 group, which also includes the galaxy ISO 502-024, and I have no idea what that means. NGC 3513 is a barred spiral galaxy, 2.81 by 1.28 arc minutes, and magnitude 12.13. It's about 40 million light years away from Earth, and it's approximately 45,000 light years across. It was discovered by William Herschel at the same time as 3511. This line of stars in Hydra's tail was seen by the Waru Indians of Guyana as Heaven's Gate. Apparently, Hananatu, the sky god, kept the humans he created as slaves without any kinds of luxuries. One day, through a hole in the clouds, someone discovered a place of beauty below, with birds and butterflies and lush vegetation. One day, a young warrior discovered a hole in the sky, and he climbed down through the branches of an enormous tree. Out of curiosity, the other inhabitants followed him. An escape committee was made and a rope made. When Hananatu discovered where they were, he was quite annoyed at losing his little helpers. As a punishment, he pledged never to let any human back into heaven, no matter what. At first, life on Earth was not as easy as it seemed until the humans discovered Earth girls. Then there was no stopping them. Hananatu was particularly disturbed by the willingness of Earth girls to mate with water deities. By daring to swim in a sacred lake, the girls gave birth to an evil horde of sea serpents. Later, when the people tried to return to heaven, they found that they could not because a fat person had become wedged in a hole in the sky. And that is the end of Hydra.
Hi. Oh. No. Nope. Okay.
Yeah.
More.
You only have to drag the, what's the matter? Oh, you guys are really short. You have to get a 7.
You're right.
Just drag on the, March, April, yeah, no,
Nightscapes.
yeah, the other one we can put on during break,
Okay, all right.
but both of them will come on
Yeah,
eventually.
wait a minute. We'll do that. Yeah, just sorry. Just give me a minute. Yeah. I'm just getting Jay's in there. Yeah. Exactly. I'm trying to just set up. Let's go here. Okay, and what is the next? Okay, we have this handy dandy controller there.
Well, thanks, everyone. Back to the format we're familiar with. This is the intersection. We were fortunate to have Wick Gale present to us again. As I mentioned, I'm Mark Irvin, the new president. We have some announcements coming up, and here's our agenda for the evening. What's up this month by Jay Show and Tell, the C-Star for Ward Tulloch. What's new, Mike Caracas and Stan Runge with Lunar Scopes. Love break, and then of course our main presentation by Jay talking about the Red Planet. Announcements. I think we all know about the Waterfront Planetarium. If anything else will do it. I think there's not quite sure if it's open on usually Wednesdays or one Wednesday a month, and we just have to check our website or the U of M site to find out when that.
Is it what? Is it every Wednesday or just
one a month? I thought.
Last Wednesday of the month.
Yes, thank you. Okay, if your fundraising committee is run by Wayne, he's in the back. He's our host for tonight. He put his hand up. Explore the Universe Stan is here, and he's Your contact, if you're interested in doing the Florida Universe certificate or any of the observations associated with it. Mike does our loaner program right behind Stan. Workshop ideas and volunteers, that's also Stan. And we had a workshop, I guess, on April 5th. Well attended, East Side Church out in, I guess, West Kildonan or North Kildonan. We had a lot of repairs done and some couple of good presentations and some observing out in the parking lot. And thanks to James Fast. I don't think he's here today. He's actually fortunate to be visiting with his son down in the States watching some baseball games. Upcoming, well, we have Telescopes for Kids, which is an ongoing program we're running. We're fundraising for it. Game Wing is the contact. Science Rendezvous is coming up less than a month. May 10th. And I'm not sure if you're still looking for volunteers, Stan. Sure.
I was just thinking on that for a minute.
You better.
It's a great event. It's held at the university. Lots of people come out. It's directed towards kids. Now, I'm trying to do something this year, sort of on the mentorship program. This is for the people who are newer in scopes. We have regulars, Gail's there every year. Here's the scope, draws a good crowd. But what I'm trying to do now is try to get newer members who haven't done anything like this, or unfamiliar with equipment, or uncertain.
Okay.
If you come out, we'll mentor you up with somebody, and you can spend a day seeing the different equipment, and learning all the different types of scopes.
Nobody else can hear you, I guess, online. You're muffled.
You have to come to the front.
Sorry. Can you repeat everything after this is Stan?
I don't mind you.
Well, you can tell the people online that they don't matter if you like.
They don't matter. Is that what you're saying?
Okay, well, you're on the mic now.
No, you're being broadcast.
Okay.
Phone there.
So
This one will pick you up.
we have regular people who come out for the science rendezvous. And these are members who know how to use their scope, but there's always newer people who don't know how to use those scopes and are probably a little concerned about, getting in front of people. So we want to kind of mentor you, have you come along, we'll double you up with somebody, so you'll be helping them when they need a break. It's only 3 hours on a Saturday. And it's a good opportunity for you to learn to use a lot of different scopes. And it's a great event because you do a lot of things during the day. You will absorb a lot of information on how to do these things. So I'm sitting over there and I am still taking names of people who want, so that we can sort of figure out who you want to be with. They'll have a solar scope in white light, the solar scope, like the PST that the club loans out. It's a great opportunity for you to sort of do that. Come see me, give me your name if you're going to be able to join us for that event.
Excellent. Thank you, Stan. I could vouch for that program. I volunteered 2 years ago. We had it, unfortunately, we were canceled last year because of some activity on the campus, as you might remember. But this year, so it's going to be doubly good this year. And I guess if you haven't participated, if you haven't, you get a chance to talk to Stan. It's a really enjoyable day. A lot of kids come through. I don't think. Yeah, go ahead, Stan.
Free t-shirt.
Free t-shirt. There's a free t-shirt, and they gave you a lunch too, if I recall. Now, if that's still on, but you get a lunch and snacks occasionally if somebody's good enough to bring them. But it's a tremendous day, and lots of crowds, lots of kids come through. Moving along, Astronomy Day coming up.
There's a correction.
Okay, is there a correction? Yes.
The site is not at the Leaf, but it's at the,
Yes. Hang on to that.
the site, is not at the Leaf, it'd be at the cargo pond, which is closer to that pond. And, I think, Scott is gonna do some live streaming. But there's a nearby shelter with washrooms and picnic tables. It's perfect to do casting from.
Yes, that's an excellent site maintenance.
And it's licensed.
The bar is not open yet.
Open.
That was the first question I asked.
There's a morning and afternoon, isn't there? Or are we just running all day?
There's 2 parts, yeah, daytime and nighttime.
Okay, so there'll be a morning shift if you're volunteering, and an afternoon, evening shift, I should say. Kind of later afternoon. I think we talked about later morning to afternoon and then into the evening. So probably 7, 8 that whenever they close. The park closes around 11:30 in the night in the evening. So we have to be out by 11:30, unfortunately.
It's right within days, it's not dark enough.
Okay, well, it is May, but it's,
There's a first quarter moon, and so you can start looking at that at 4 o'clock. That's why they choose a stronger day that week, so that we don't have to wait so long.
great. Again, thanks Wayne for managing to get that site for us again this year. That was the one we got just after COVID finished. We had a great response. I mean, we had hundreds of people out. And I expect to have a similar reaction this year again. Moving along, further in the month or further in the summertime, we have a small daycare called On the Move at Carpathia School in River Heights. And again, Wayne is actually taking that one on as well. I participated in it as have a number in the club. But what we do is we present to the children between 4 and like 8 years old. And very inquisitive kids. You'd be surprised. It's a really enjoyable event. We present indoors, a couple presentations going indoors, and then we have solar and lunar observing outside. And if you have an opportunity, it is a weekday. So please check your calendars, and the more we can have outside, the shorter the lines are for the children. Shorter lines are always better for little kids because they tend to get a little bit antsy if they're waiting too long. And by the time they get to your telescope, then it's built up. So if we have more volunteers, all the better. And then, of course, we're still looking for volunteers. Are we still looking for volunteers, Damon? For Sprucewood Star Party? Or have you got your committee all set?
The committees that we have.
Okay.
For volunteers yet.
Okay, you haven't started to check yet? Okay, but if you're interested in helping out Sprucewood Star Party, I don't think Damien will turn you away. There's always things for people to do. And it's another tremendous event that we put on at our center for 40 years, I think. It's been going just more seriously probably in the last 20. And I think that's it for announcements, unless we have any others from the audience that I missed. We'll move on. Okay, these are just some things for reference. These are, if you become a member of the club, here's the process to follow to get your name onto our member list and to get involved in all of the discussion groups and subgroups that go on. There's photography, there's sketching, I guess the buy and sell, any number of and if we haven't got one that you'd like to see, then that's the opportunity to make a suggestion and help us build one. Moving along, and we have a members observing night. Is it on?
It's the 19th.
It's the 19th. Okay, so I messed that one up. That's my problem. Isn't full night looking really good? I don't know, but
Full moon.
I guess you're on your full moon. Okay, but we've got clear skies, so I guess
You can go tomorrow night too.
yeah, there's nothing to stop you from going out tomorrow.
But the
After
official
a
one
member-
is,
Yes. But the coordinated one will be on April 19th with the club. Jake.
The road up to the observatory is in pretty decent shape.
Excellent news.
And easy to get around.
So that's excellent to hear. So guys, that's even more reason to head out tomorrow. If you guys are into narrowband imaging, it doesn't matter, there's a full moon. No, those narrowband filters, they right through the moonlight. Moving along. There we go. I guess Gordon, you're up. Are you ready to go? You are, sir. You're gonna talk about.
Oh, sorry, it's
Oh, who
Jay.
did I miss?
Jay.
Jay, oh, I skipped ahead on me. Sorry to get you all excited, Gord. It's Jay.
Let's do Jay.
Prepared to defer to order.
Okay.
Bigger than I am.
Yes. Go.
Yours? That's not me.
we have another show and tell. Show and tell.
Okay, all right.
So that can go maybe.
It's not me. That's February.
Oh,
Sure.
Where's that one you just put up on?
Hang on.
On your desktop.
Okay. I'll introduce you.
this is.
I'm just trying to get into the. Yeah. This one, Nightscapes, is that it?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Give me an F5.
Okay. All right, and you have the microphone. Good.
I have, is it turned on?
Yep.
Okay. Well, we're a little later, so we're going from mid-April to mid-May on the what's up in the sky for the next month. And it's an interesting time of year. It's kind of transitional because we're moving into galaxies, as Gail's pointed out, and then at the end of the night, and by the time we reach mid-May, we'll be looking more into the Milky Way as we go along. So we had already a little discussion about the amount of darkness and daylight. And this little box here shows the amount of darkness and astronomical twilight, which is actually dark enough to do some observing, although you won't be getting the faintest object. So you can see this little jog here is because of daylight saving time. But you can see in this dashed box here that at the beginning, in the middle part of April, we have a fairly substantial amount of darkness from about 4:35 in the morning until up to it, beginning at about 11:30. And as you get toward the end of the next month, in the middle of May, that has been cut approximately in half. So this is actually a very good time of year to get some observing done, because you still have, especially at the start of it right now, you have a fair bit of darkness. Of course, astronomical twilight, the sun is still well below the horizon, so you can still do observing of the brighter objects. So we start off with April 12th evening, and here's approximately what we're seeing. It'd be nice to turn the light down a little bit. Anyway, we're looking at the winter Milky Way disappearing off in toward the west. It will be low down. We're looking at, well, the night of full moon or close to it. We're looking at Leo, backwards question mark, Virgo, which is an area we'll be working with a lot. And Orion here is disappearing down in toward the horizon. It's probably not very good for observing anymore. At this time, at 10 p.m., it's really the first hour that it's dark enough to begin observing, although even in this depiction, the sky still has a little bit of brightness to it. So after 10 o'clock, before you can start to see these, so pretty much say goodbye to the Orion Nebula and start to say hello to all this other stuff that's coming up. And there's no Milky Way in that area. So you pretty much need a bit of a telescope to be able to see your way around in it. I want to talk about the realm of the galaxies, which is a name that was given to that area in a book many years ago, probably farther away in the past than any of us have been alive. But this area here is just chock-a-block full of galaxies, to the point where in some parts of it, especially over here near Virgo, you don't have to go looking for a galaxy. You just point the telescope in the general area, especially if you have a Dobsonian, and you just wander around back and forth through that area. And there's three particular parts to it. It's easy to find because it's in between Regulus, the brightest star in Leo, and Leo is certainly a very easy constellation to spot, and Spica, which is the brightest star in Virgo. And just for finding Spica, there is a little trick we use, which we've mentioned before in the past, where you can go from the heart of the Big Dipper, just follow it around to get to Arcturus and down to Spica. And so we say arcing to Arcturus and speeding on to Spica. So that way you'll find your way between those two stars and then just start looking, and particularly start looking over towards the Spica side. And what are you going to see in there? Well, here we got a bit of a zoom. Here's Regulus here. This is the bright star on the end of Leo, and Spica is just down into right here. So Here is just a sort of the brighter galaxies in that area, and you can see how easy it would be, especially if you can go from the nebula over to this bright star here, whose name I forgot. Just roam back and forth through there with the dot, and you'll come across all kinds of these things. But there's also another area in here that's got a number of bright Messier galaxies that's just to the east side of Regulus, and then a small group in here, but that's a very pretty group called the Leo triplet. And so there you have those three areas if you want to go galaxy hunting. So what's it look like? Oh, here's a picture I took some years back, and I didn't center it very well, but this is in the middle of the Virgo cluster. And so this is what's called Markarian's chain, but inside this, there's about 4 Messier objects, which usually marks the brightest thing. But imagine just scanning back and forth with your telescope with a field of view of this, and you'd just be hitting galaxies everywhere you go. You only see the bright ones here, but there's way over 30 galaxies in that field of view, which is 2.5 times the size of the full moon or something like that. And so you get a lot of these bright ones, M84, M86, M87 down here in the bottom. And just outside the top is another Messier object that I didn't point the telescope quite as well as I could have. So there's a lot of stuff in there to look at. If you're going to do the Messier marathon, which is the sort of thing you might want to try, well, you're a bit late for it right now, you would certainly have to, a lot of challenge identifying which galaxy you're looking at when you're in that area. You get over to the Leo triplet area, we've got 3 bright galaxies here. These photograph very nicely if you're in photography. And they're a little harder to find because they're a tighter group. But again, there's 2 Messier objects in here and a number of tiny galaxies. And then we get over to the other one, yeah, M895, 6, and 105. So fairly small galaxies in here, but they are actually not that difficult to find at all either. So it's a good area to go galaxy hunting if that's what you want to be doing. Unfortunately, M105 is behind our little label here. So by morning, tomorrow night or tomorrow morning, we've got the summer Milky Way rising. The winter Milky Way is now down and gone below the western horizon. We've still got all of these Leo galaxies in here and the Virgo galaxy down here, but by this time, by next morning, they're getting pretty close to the horizon, still well observable. The brighter part of the Milky Way is probably too low, but Cygnus and in that region is starting to show fairly decently. But you're going to get a lot more of that in the next month. So if you go into May the 11th and take a look in the evening sky, we see that our realm of the galaxies is still well positioned. Nothing much has changed in there. So you've got a couple of months to look for those galaxies. I want to take a look at the planets. Here's a chart of where the interior planets are. The rocky planets are tonight. And so we have ourselves here. With this arrow, Venus is here, Mercury here, Sun over here, and Mars over here. And you sort of think to yourself, well, what's that tell me about the sky? But if you think about it, here we are centered on Earth. The Earth is rotating in a counterclockwise portion. So if you're on this side, you're obviously on the dark side of the Earth, and you're rotating in towards the sunlight. But before you see the sun in your view, you're going to see Venus and Mercury. So it tells you where Venus and Mercury are just before sunrise. And at the same time, if you're in the sunny side and rotating into the darkness, the sun disappears and then Mars disappears. So Mars will be found actually quite nicely placed in the evening sky. So you get some idea of why the planets are where they are. When we look at Jupiter and Saturn with Earth here, Jupiter is certainly very visible. It's a pretty good angle away from the sun, but Saturn is much closer to the sun, the angle to it. So you see Saturn will be low in the morning sky. And so when we put together a chart, it tells you here where things are in the morning. And unfortunately, the way the ecliptic is working, Mercury, although it's coming out fairly far away from the sun, is so low down, it instead of coming up like this, it comes out like this from the sun. So it stays low against the horizon. Venus is low as well, but it's so bright that it's always easy to see wherever it is. And the interesting thing about Venus is that it's coming up to its maximum brightness, which I'll talk about in a minute, which seems a little strange that Venus has been so bright and prominent, and now you kind of have to look for it in the morning sky, but it's actually brighter. Mars is easy to see. It's actually the best place of all the planets, but it's really starting to get pretty small and it's fading away. So you're going to need a little bit of magnification, like a telescope of it, Glen Lake. So here's what it looks like a couple of evenings from now. We have Jupiter well placed in the sky. Mars is even better placed. The other planets are actually behind the tree here. And they're all faint ones, Neptune and planets like that. So what have we got that's interesting? Well, the crescent moon and Venus in the morning sky, a very thin crescent Venus and a crescent moon, it actually lend itself to a pretty nice picture. The moon's above Jupiter, not particularly special. This is interesting. Mars passing through the Beehive cluster again. We had that a couple of years back, and it's going to do it again for us. And come to May 4, the moon gets in there with it, and that poses an interesting photographic challenge. So here we are, sort of wide angle view. Here's the Beehive cluster, this open cluster here, and Mars going past it. And the moon is well out of the way on May 5th, which might be your best night for a photograph to get that very bright moon as far away as you can. When you look at it on May the 5th, Mars is just north of the Beehive cluster, that's missing it. That will be an interesting picture. When a few years ago, of course, Mars is overexposed, but these days with something like Sequator to stack your pictures for you, you might be able to work a proper exposure of Mars and a proper exposure of the Beehive and maybe do a little bit of magic with Photoshop or something else. This is the real challenge. This is the one that comes by on the day before when the moon is passing, and you might have to do the same sort of thing, is take different exposures and try and get them to line up with each other. Or you could just erase the moon and put in one you took last year or something like that, as long as you get the right phase for it. What else have we got? We got the smallest full moon of the year. The media is already having a little frenzy about that we've been following it in the papers. We have Venus, Saturn, and Mercury, as I pointed out. Mercury is probably too low to see, but these two might be all right. The main thing is this is what Venus looks like at its point of maximum brightness. So the brightness of Venus depends on two things. One is how much of Venus is illuminated, and the other is how big Venus is. Well, Venus is close to it, so it's a big size, but it's only got a small part of it illuminated, but they go together so that maximum brightness will occur on the 27th with a magnitude of -4.7. We've got Comet F2 Swan, which is in the sky. It just made the media attention yesterday. So it's passing the square of Pegasus, particularly past Alpheratz. The Andromeda Galaxy is here, if you're familiar with that part of the sky. This is in the morning at, here, 5:15 a.m., sort of last chance at astronomical twilight. And the comet's been doing quite well. But the comet is.
Scott has an update on
Okay, then I'll leave it to Scott to talk about it.
Oh, I'm not, it is. I'm not talking, I don't have to talk.
Apparently it has it varies in brightness. It's had an outburst.
Yeah.
But they're expecting
Maybe more. I mean,
maybe?
Well, they were, but now they're thinking that the predictions came when they did during the outburst, so all the predictions are too high.
Okay, so it's not a great comment, but everybody with a C-star in an apartment that looks east just has to set it up so that it turns itself on in the morning. You should be able to get a good C-star picture of that. Which way do you face that? Well,
West.
time to go get friendly with your neighbors. The Lyrid meteor showers is coming up on the 27th. It's not much of a shower. ZHR is zenith hourly rate of 20. Should take that with a grain of salt because the ZHR may be 20, but the number that you will see will be somewhere between about 5 and 8 per hour. The ZHR is kind of a theoretical number. It is have a new moon and it gets up in the east with Vega. Vega is in the just to the west of the Milky Way there. So with the Milky Way rising, so will the constellation. And then we come to Omega, which is a nice little cluster in the Milky Way. And Omega is a good way to end because that's what you'll be seeing when I do or somebody does this talk next month. So there you go, something to see. All the pictures came from that hyperstar.
I'm gonna get that. I need you to come over and help me cut the first time.
Thanks. Did you get the other one on board too? The main part. Anyway, let's do that at the first. We'll do it.
Okay. Yeah.
Magic wand.
Yeah, that measure is right there, yeah.
Can you hear me now? Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Do I do that joke every time? Yeah. Well, one of the quieter voices in the group. So this is a C-Star S30. I just got it in February. Ordered it in October. From Ontario Telescope. I was probably pretty close to first on the list. So that's all it took. It was, I intended to get it, to take it to Mexico in the end of February, March, so I made it. Unfortunately, this little bit didn't come in time, so, but that's okay because the transparency was crap in Mexico, so I didn't see anything anyway. I could take pictures of M42 and bright stuff, right, but nothing like I wanted to see because in Mazatlan where we were, Orion is like up here, right? So everything underneath is easy to see. So what I wanted to talk about, normally when you see S30s or S50s, it's Big Brother, you'll see them looking more like this, right? And this is altazimuth, and it basically goes up and down like a cannon, right? What we want to talk about is why would you want to tilt one of these things like this? Spend not so exorbitant amounts of money to get equipment to do it properly, And so what's the benefit? So we'll talk about that quickly. So why bother? Well, the biggest issue is when something is going across the sky, and you can almost see it. If you hold your hand like this and you do this, you'll see that your hand rotates, right? Here's a better picture of what it looks like, courtesy of our friends in Calgary. You'll see that the yellow box is stationary, the image is stationary in the yellow box, that's what we want. That's not the altazimuth box. The altazimuth box is the red one. And you see within the altazimuth box, Orion is rotating, right? So as it goes across the sky, it changes position and it rotates. Who cares, right? Well, if you actually look at an image that you take, this is an image off this telescope. And rather than using the built-in stacking software in the app, which cheats, doesn't show you this, I used AstroPixel Processor, which is a full-up astrophotography program, to stack it manually. What you'll see is, there it is, you'll see that we've got a whole bunch of pictures superimposed on top of each other, and it makes the edges super noisy because these images have very few frames taken of them. So the reason we take a lot of frames, the reason we stack them is noise is random, signal is not. So signal gets randomized out when we take a whole bunch of frames and we're left with signal, right? So in this case, all of the noise is not randomized out, so we get these really ugly edges. Now, we can crop it, but unfortunately, this is the frame size of the S30, and it doesn't really have enough frame size to get rid of all the noise on the edges. Now, the S30 has mosaic mode, which means it'll start taking multiple pictures, like it may take 9 frames, and to keep taking 9 frames, and stack them together. Funny enough, it takes a lot longer to take 9 frames than it does to take 1, right? So it's going to take a long time to get that larger image. Now, what you'll end up with is a much larger frame that you can then crop the edges. Now, that's one way to do it. This is a better way. If you put it in equatorial mode, which means you're pointing the telescope at the North Star, so the telescope follows the sky around as it goes, you don't get that image rotation. So that's one of the big reasons we want to put a camera like this on an equatorial mount. It's the reason we want to put all telescopes on an equatorial mount, because you'll get the same issue with the Dobsonian, you'll get the same issue with any altazimuth mounted telescope, right? You'll have less drop frames. So what these cameras do, I'll use camera and telescope interchangeably. They take a picture, look at it, see if they've got like birds, stars, or trails, and it'll throw them away, right? Only keeps the good ones. Unfortunately, it keeps the ones with satellite trails in them, all that kind of stuff, but what can you do? So if it's in equatorial mode, there's less chance of getting bird and star trail pictures, so it drops less frames. Now, there's an argument, can you take longer exposures? Because generally, if you have a big telescope on an equatorial mount, you can take long exposures. Like on my big telescopes, I usually take 60 seconds to 5-minute exposures, right? Because my mount is good enough that it guides pretty well in those timelines, and I've got a guiding scope and all that kind of stuff. With this, these mounts aren't great. They're not bad, but they're not great. So long exposures will tend to have star trails because the stars actually move around. Somebody just posted on Cloudy Nights, which is a good source of information, a graph of stars moving around on sea stars, the way it tracks, right? So they take a whole bunch of images and they see well, how much they have to move the image to get a good reference, and that moves around a fair bit, right? So it's not great. The second thing is with these devices, you tend to get walking noise, it's called. In other words, they don't dither, they don't kind of move slightly between frames. They do not track very well, so it's almost effectively the same thing sometimes. But they don't dither on purpose, and therefore what you get is no randomization in frames, so you start to get noise accumulations, and it makes it look blotchy, right? Yeah.
Some of the higher end smart scopes have dithering as one of the newest features, like
So the higher end, which?
smart scopes.
Well, all telescopes that use, like the software that's used in this is the same software I use on my big scope. It's K-Star Z-Cost under the covers. It does dither, so I don't know why they don't dither.
I'm just saying it's a matter of time before dithering will.
Yeah. It's been pointed out a number of times, so hopefully they do. Anyway, so longer exposures, probably not. I use 10-second exposures with this camera. Because I'm in a Bortle 8 sort of environment too, so my sky isn't very good. So there's lots of options for these alt-azimuth mounts. I should say the equatorial mounts for these alt-azimuth devices. This one came from Ontario Telescope. It was about 100, what did I say, $100. This dovetail was $20. The reason I have this green dovetail here is it actually, this device actually comes with a dovetail, but it's short, and it means that this knob hits the C-star while it's moving around. So I could have taken this knob off and put a different one on, but I'd ordered this anyway, so whatever. We just put it on there. It looks nice, green. Green is faster these days. So you can see iOptron has a one that's a little cheaper, about the same price really, but Skywatcher, this one seems to be the one that most people are going for. And Wayne was telling me it's hard to get, right? Yeah. So of course, you see they're basically the same thing. The really important thing with them is they have slow motion screw-based adjustment, right? There is actually go the right way. Oops. Oh, and of course you'll need a tripod. This is a tripod I actually got with my Solar Quest telescope, and I have yet another one of these with my another alt-azimuth mount I have. So these are easy to get. You may already have one, or you can get one for $130. So they're decent. Now, what you don't want to do is use a tripod off a camera that you use for a camera. So people have gotten kind of ingenious about what they use one. This is my favorite. Well, he's used a car jack, which is good, right? This thing, you can adjust the altitude, right? You can adjust the azimuth. So yeah, it's kind of hard to move around, but it works. This is kind of less optimal because this is locked to a certain latitude. So when I was in Mazatlan, I was at 23 degrees latitude. So this thing was right pointing at the pole star at 23 degrees. We're here at 49.9 degrees latitude, so it's pointing at 50-ish, right? So what that would mean is this is 3D printed. So you'd have to print one for each major latitude and then change the length of this leg to get it to be the correct latitude, which is kind of finicky. And of course, you make it too short, it just falls over, right? Part of the purpose here is the center of gravity is over the leg, right? So this thing is another mistake because what he wants to do is put center of gravity over the middle. So he puts it on this nice floppy cantilever lever here, which is always a bad idea. So it goes like this. It may look solid, but it's not, right? So don't do that. And a normal tripod is okay, but you have to loosen it, move it, tighten it, and if it's anything like my tripod, you tighten it, and then it settles 2 degrees off where you were, right? So, I think Scott posted a picture, or somebody posted a picture, maybe Wayne posted a picture of the ZWO tripod, and it's something like this, which is just a photographic tripod. So you actually want to get one like this, because when you're moving it around, this slow motion is really helpful, right? I'll show you how that works in a bit. So this is clever, rather overkill, but if you've been out to Glenny, you might notice that we actually have a few of these on posts at Glenny. They're already I assume pre-polar aligned, so you can just slap one of these on there.
They were in the 80s. I don't know if they've been done since then, but
And they may be locked in place and you never get to move without a hammer. So, but it's an idea. So this is what I have, right? Obviously. So how do you set it up? First thing you have to do is you have to update your version of the software to the latest version, because it doesn't support EQ mode except in the last 2 revisions that have come out. So you need to update the app on your phone, and then it'll prompt you, it'll update the firmware on the device. Then on the app, you click on More, you click on Advanced Features, click on Mount Mode. This is probably Aldaz mode currently on your device. And then it'll give you a screen like this. And first of all, it has a nice little accelerometer in the device that will tell you what the current tilt is. So, but if it's at 47, you turn this until it says 50. Easy. Next, you click on Get Polar Aligned Deviation. The telescope will turn itself on and slew to basically the zenith along the meridian, right? Pointing kind of south, right? And what it'll do, while they're starting it up, what it'll do is it'll take a picture at the meridian, then it'll slew 15 degrees in right ascension. It'll take a picture, and then it'll slew 15 degrees in right ascension. Take a picture, right? And the difference between the rotation in those pictures, it can calculate the difference between where your telescope's pointing and where it should be pointing. And it actually shows you that after it's thought about it for a while, it actually shows you that as 2 numbers on the screen. So what do? You twiddle the knobs. This is altitude. These 2 screws here, you loosen one, you tighten the other, you'll see turns it in azimuth, right? Easy, just like a real telescope mount. Great. So what you want to get to is within a degree. And it takes care of it from there. So it gives you a nice check mark, nice gold star, and you're off to the races. Most people then push this button again, and it goes back to this point, does it again, and it comes out different. Very confusing. So don't do that, because it'll be wrong. Just push this button here, and it'll take you back, and you can use it as normal. So that's it. Takes a minute. The polar align, which is really nice for those of us who have bigger amounts that we have polar align. It takes no time at all. And the benefit is you're going to get much better pictures, a much better result. So as I said, we've got the azimuth adjustment, we've got the altitude adjustment, and of course, you see it on the screen. Oops. Okay, mine is way different. So you see it on the screen as just numbers that you just have to tweak the knobs of it and get it aligned. Once it is aligned, the light on the device goes from orange to green. So you know which mode it's in. And that's it. Use it as normal. Any questions? Yeah,
One little tip that I've experienced with mine is that, if I put my dew shield on after I've done the alignment, it throws the alignment off. Put your dew shield on first, because otherwise you're dealing with scope.
sorry, say that again a little louder.
The dew shield, if you're using a dew shield on.
Oh, the dew shield.
Then you want to put that on first before you do the alignment, otherwise even.
Oh, it'll mess it up. Yeah, yeah. Of course, it's got a dew heater in it, so you don't necessarily need a dew shield. I haven't needed one.
I have to use it because my light is.
Okay. Yeah,
Why don't you put a motor on it?
sorry,
Why don't you put a motor on it?
a motor on.
The track?
Hey, just 10-second images.
I do the whole sky, I can't do 6 hours.
Any other questions?
So, I just got my S50 still in the box, for the clouds. And so I'm just wondering, should I get used to it in all paths?
Yes.
And then migrate to
Yes.
EQ or should I?
Yes.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, like this, other than being a kind of academic exercise, it's, for me, it's not really worth it, because I got a shed full of equipment, right, that I just have to roll the roof back and off I go, right, so, however, of course, if I take this somewhere, I'll take this rig with me, right? I didn't have it in Mexico, so I had to take a lot of mosaics, which took a long time. But it didn't matter because the transparency stuff. So I could see bright stuff, but some of the stuff I was trying to shoot, couldn't see any nebulosity. It was not good. So just not enough light getting through. So, but like I said, you can throw this in a carry-on, and the tripod goes in a normal suitcase. Throw it in a carry-on, and you can take it anywhere in the world. So this is a great camera for eclipses and just take it with you to dark places, right? So rather than, if I had it last year for the solar eclipse in Mazatlan, it would have been fantastic, right? I decided just to take a camera and a tripod because I didn't want to haul a bunch of equipment with me, right? So this would have been great. Any other questions? Next word, on to the next. We have one more presentation from Vicky Gustafson. She'll be up in a second. Okay. Our mic is.
Is he still wearing the mic?
You might be, Gord, don't go to the washroom. You're wearing the mic. It's fire.
Vicky, which one was yours? Is it which?
Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Vicky.
Okay, thank you.
Do I have to push any buttons on this?
There's the magic stick there. And I guess we can turn.
Yes. Turn the lights on. Saj? You have to, oh, sorry, he wanted me to speak by slant. Am I allowed to tell a joke?
Yes.
Yeah, Dennis isn't here, so you're
Okay,
good.
so how many astronomers does it take to change the light bulb?
Why would you change it?
You're close. Nobody knows because they all refuse to do it. Okay, so this is my camera. And my telescope is, let me find the right button here. Nope, went the wrong way.
Yeah, the arrows seem to be backwards on that.
50% chance, right?
Yeah.
50% chance of getting it right, 9% chance of getting it wrong. So yeah, 3-year-old phone. This is just the stuff that the phone tells me in the metadata. And some of the pictures I use the night mode, the button and stand very still. And some of them are taken through my random binoculars. So it's just some pictures I took of the lunar eclipse. So this is, I'm pretty sure they're all through the binoculars. I don't think the phone took that picture, which has some. So that's the raw picture, and then that's what I get when I just crop picture. So yeah, came out pretty nice. That's why I wanted to share them.
That's good.
And I stayed up half the night to do it.
Yep.
On my deck in my backyard, so there's the crop version of that one. I have no idea, those are stars. I don't know which ones they were at this point. I wasn't recording that. Now, I thought this was funny, that's me trying to line up whichever lens the phone wanted to use. With the eyepiece and the binoculars, you can see the outline of the binoculars, and at first I thought, oh, that's a throwaway one. Cause I've got binoculars in the picture, but when I cropped that one, pretty colors came out. So I'm glad I kept that one. And then at the end of totality, it started to get bright again. And that's the crop version, so they're a little fuzzy, but I thought the colors were nice. And this was a surprise, it was not the same night, a week later. I thought I was going out to try and find I can't remember what it's called now.
Direction.
The twilight glow.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's like
that-
dipole light.
Yeah, there was this funny glow in the sky. I haven't seen an aurora, believe it or not, for years. I kept missing them. So I just took a series. And I worked out the directions with the compass on my phone from my deck. So I know that was pointing north because I know my trees. So, okay, not bad. Then I start turning a little more west. And a little more to the west.
Right.
And heading south. West. And that one is pretty much, well, yeah. Southwest. So I did the bit with the hands and the span and to try and figure out. So I just took an estimate from the south horizon up to where this thing had arced all the way across the sky and stopped. I think I calculated it was about 35 degrees up from the south. So it was pretty interesting. And then this one was somewhere pointing up, and I didn't remember, but maybe somebody
It's Gemini.
knows where those stars are.
It's Gemini in the bottom right.
Okay,
Mars, yeah.
there you go. That's it.
That's beautiful.
I will not read the mic.
And you too can do show and tells like this. Just let Judy know in advance and you can just show off whatever you've been working on.
I don't know, there was supposed to be. Supposed to be what's new with Minecraft.
Okay.
Yeah, Mike.
Right.
All right, and I think, do you have the mic on?
Nope, I put it right over there.
Okay.
Table over there.
There.
I want a table on this side. Okay.
Oh, I took that thing away right away. Are we having a break now?
No, actually,
One more.
there's still one more, what's new, and it's gonna be the Mike and Stan show. The Lone Show program.
Well,
Unfortunately, we don't have a presentation that goes on the screen.
So,
Won't exactly be a Mike and Stan show, it's gonna be more of a Stan show.
Stan show.
The days of old when you used to be on the, listen to the radio. Somebody trying to describe it.
How many teams?
Oh, the science team.
The science teams?
Yeah, we're like Bill Nye, the science guy, and his assistant.
more like Pinky in the Brain.
Yeah. So one of the benefits, of course, and this is, well, I know a lot of people I see here in the audience here will have scopes, but, so there's a lot of people out there who are newer members and who are unfamiliar with some of the equipment that we have in our loaner scope program. So our intent today was to, show something. And are you gonna be able to have that?
Yep.
Going? Okay, you'll be able. Okay. So this is going to be discussion of the PST telescope loaner package. The package comes pretty complete. First of all, we have a nice heavy tripod for it, and there's this little bolt that you will attach to the equipment. Right, Jay? Right, Jay?
Great.
Right? So you can put the legs out and extend it higher.
If you want to close the box lid.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, or put them on the ground or something.
They look impressive, like.
Now, like when I'm doing, astronomy, it's okay to put the PST telescope itself kind of and point it and look at for prominences. But I don't like having to adjust the scope continuously to follow along. So one of the things I pushed Mike to do is to alter the package. And so this is the new version of what the package is. And we'll describe the three parts of it. Part one, a very solid tripod. Part two is the Skywatcher mount. And this is very, very similar to what everybody saw in the previous presentation. There's that little wedge thing here that you can use to align the sky. And then there's the equatorial mount.
That one has a telescope in it?
That's the second, that is,
You want the telescope in there, yeah.
oh, is this one got it?
Oh,
Yes.
polar-
Yeah, polar scope.
Yeah.
So in fact, this package itself, you can adapt to just put your camera onto here and use this for night shooting as well. So you can shoot day and night. So,
Or a small telescope, whatever you have handy. Little 6 mil work that could be lovely, 80 mil.
My Tasco.
What's your Pascal? What's the capacity of that stand? Is it about 10 pounds, give or take?
yeah,
So that's pretty substantial actually for a little amount like this.
simple to use.
That's your big notch.
I just, I'll hold it for you. There you go. There you go. There we go. Just pretend it's gonna happen.
It comes with a bracket here, and this bracket provides the 1/4-inch thread that's required to go into the back of the PST. So the whole plan is to basically set up the package here.
There you go.
Did you get it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So then we just put this piece in. And onto here. The PST, Personal Solar Telescope. It's a wonderful little scope designed to see the sky in H alpha. So it's the kind of scope that provides you the red view of the sun, where you could see details on the face of the sun, other than sunspots. You can see all the other stuff that's on the sunspots, other than sunspots, and you can see the prominences that are hanging off. It's tuned to a very narrow frequency. Because it's tuned to that frequency, it's got a little bit of adjustment here. This piece here, if you rotate it in one direction, you'll notice the prominences will show up, and there they are, but you'll look at the face of it, and you'll see the stuff on the face of it.
Yeah, almost here.
Yeah, you'll see stuff there, but it won't be quite as good. But if you turn it the other way, all of a sudden, it shifts over, so you can find a sweet spot that you could use to put it back and forth. So it's a 40mm scope. And this also comes with a series of eyepieces.
25 here.
25, so when you put this one in, it's pretty easy to center the scope in it, this big, when you're looking at a circle this big with your eye. That's the somewhat data. You'll put that in. So. Using people's phones, because my understanding is today everybody uses as a compass, they use their phones, right? So you can even during the daytime sort of polar align this to a reasonable degree. And then you can hook up the mount for power and be powering and be tracking. I like tracking because that way you don't have to keep adjusting the mount on an ongoing basis. So we told you about the 25mm eyepiece.
That's 18 there.
18 and
2x Barlow.
and 2x Barlow. So Barlow, of course, doubles the power of any of the eyepieces. So it gives you a bigger and bigger view of the frame. So this in itself is pretty good. Now, I know Kyle's going to be borrowing the scope for a scout troop and showing people. So when you're doing for public viewing, when you want to show your neighbors, and you don't want to have to keep adjusting this mount just a little bit, just a little bit, just a little bit. You know, you can you use the power, put this in, you can crank up the power to show the prominences if they're nice, a little better than normal. Never think about that here. Now, another thing that's included in this package is an T adapter. And a ring for your camera. Now, we provide a ring for a Nikon and for a Canon camera. So if you have a digital camera, and I use a digital camera. I know today everybody has cameras, little things that they put in, but I like the fact that, you know, the digital cameras have a nice large frame in it. You know, unless you're paying a lot of money, most people will probably have a solar planetary camera that's got a little bitty little get it on. I like using my digital camera. So basically, you can use this to hook up your camera to. Now, a lot of people have been wondering, you know, saying, "Oh, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't focus properly." You need to put 2 power onto it. So this is what I do. The little on the back of the Barlow, you can pull the lens off. Carefully, let's not get dust on everything. That actually screws it to there. And then you put your digital camera on. I use a Canon T1i. Drop it in there, tighten it up. Now it brings the camera into focus. That has been a problem. A lot of people say, I can't get, is that a Canon? You can take the big lens off and so if you want to do photography of this, even better. So this was kind of built to be a fairly inclusive package that you could actually do some stuff with. Aside from observing, you can actually get into the photography side of it. Now, the new e-scopes are great, but they do it in white light, right? They do it so you can see the sunspots. And I know Rob's been working like crazy with his new, is it the S50 you're using for the sunspot chart? So he's got a way that, you know, provides nice images, but you won't get the hydrogen alpha, you won't, images that you will with this particular scope. So you drop that in there, and there you go, your photographic package. And because it's tracking, once you get it centered, you can do the thing where you make small movies, AVI. Some of these cameras have the AVI mode that you can use. I use a laptop with a program called Backyard EOS, connected up to my camera, and it just makes the camera into a movie camera and it makes AVIs. And AVI is a format of a movie. You can put that into a stacking package. You'll break it down to individual frames, stack all the individual frames, and give you a higher resolution image. So basically, a very comprehensive little package that's included with the scope. We will have this set up on Astronomy Day. We will have this set up on Science Rendezvous. So if anybody's coming out to, I was telling you about the mentorship and learning how to use this stuff. That's part of the reason to have you come out. You can come out and see how some of this stuff will be used. So I'm gonna ask if anybody has a question about any of this now.
I have a question for you.
Yes, the young man.
Yeah. So how do you find the sun in that scope? There's no solar finder. How does that work?
Excellent question. Does everybody here know the answer? Finder. There is a built-in finder. So when you take a look at the frontal scope from this side here, the sunlight's coming here, you'll see there's just a little hole here. And that goes through the camera and bounces up to a little screen here. So somebody threw out a separate answer, which is correct as well. So you'll take this and seeing the sun shining down, you'll see the shadow of this scope on the ground. You'll turn this to a point where it's minimized in size. So you can tell if it's turned this way, it's wider until it gets, you see the minimum amount on the ground. And at that point in time, you'll start to see in here, you'll have a little round dot, which is the sun. So when you get that centered in the middle of this scope, it's in the view of the camera. As usual, whenever you do any visual work, to start with, you pick the lowest power eyepiece, the 25. Put that in there and then use that to center it. And then once you got it centered, you can start doing anything else that you want to get this. You're gonna say,
I was gonna have another question, but I'm gonna let the audience ask another question for it. I'll show.
Being as you're looking at the sun, are there any safety issues that we need to look out for in using that scope?
don't do this. Good question. Well, they came out with the scope and it's totally safe. I mean, you can look through here, it's totally safe. It's narrowed down to the one frequency of light. When you put an eyepiece in here, it was made to be totally safe. So this is one of the kind of scopes that we will have on the astronomy day. One of the scopes that we'll have on at the science rendezvous. And these are great because it gets to show people that the sun can be seen in different ways. The young lady in the back.
You want to say something about the screen hood that you use?
Yes. We don't provide it as part of the package.
No.
Those are
Standing in the sun.
one of the things that we do is we have pieces of cloth which is black on the inside. It's a big white cloth on the outside. Because if you're in the sun, you don't want to put black cloth on your head. It will cook your milling pretty quick. So we put that over our heads and cover it up. And it allows you to see the image better because it reduces all the extraneous light that's coming into your eyeball. So that's a good thing to have. Even a towel. The catch is you want something that's black on the inside. So that because then there's no light reflecting on the inside. Beach towel, yeah, that's why I say those specialty ones that we use are black on the inside.
Where would you get a cloth like that?
How much money do you have? I know somebody who makes them.
Where would I buy one if I don't have a connection?
Meter black cloth and surgery.
Yes. And you can get, the stuff that I got was from, window covers.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The shades, but there's a room darkening shades.
Yeah.
And it's always Giant Tiger that has them on for about $10. Sometimes they're 15. So, you know, they're made for larger windows and you basically have enough for two. If you ask nicely, I know somebody makes them.
Okay.
So there you go. An opportunity for you to image, an opportunity to view.
How does one take this out as a member? What's the process?
Just send me an email through the website and I'll pick it up and then I'll respond to you and tell you when it's available.
Okay.
And then you just make arrangements with myself.
Okay.
Michelle.
What's that? Sometimes oral then? Could you
Yes.
transmit?
It is
Just stick with oral and stick with that.
I suppose you could, but you're lengthening it.
You can't hear it.
This shortens my application a little bit. It doesn't matter much what as much when you transfer the Barlow from then from that actual Barlow cell. I do this all the time with plantar imaging too. I take the Barlow out and I just screw it onto the camera itself. It just makes the focal length work a bit better. But one thing too that we haven't talked about yet is that you're not restricted to use only these eyepieces. They're not specific to this telescope. You can use your own if you want. There was one comment from a previous person that was I'm the co-speaker. There was a comment from the person that was previously loaned this out, took this one out, and he found that the 25mm eyepiece had too narrow a field of view, and it was really hard for kids to find it for eye placement. But if you increase the power a little bit, it should help to make sure that it's more centered. So don't feel like how when you're taking it out. You got a 6 to
lens.
yeah, or 6 to 10. That'd be fine, I think. I read one review that said a 6mm eyepiece was really quite nice.
Yeah.
So experiment with before you it.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to add. That's Dan.
It's lovely.
Monthly rental. Yeah.
Just a comment, we're up at Pitt Peak a few years ago, they had it's for visitors to look through. Like Coronado, it was 120mm, beautiful big scope. The same idea, so that's all the scope, of course. And the quality of this one isn't that much worse than that one.
Yeah.
It's a good machine.
Oh, yeah, for
You
sure.
don't need a lot of aperture when you're looking at the sun.
No.
Yeah.
Sure.
Light gathering is not an issue.
What depletion is.
Yes, Wayne.
Is that
Is
that a star tracker?
This one,
Yes.
yeah.
So do you just press one button and it'll start tracking?
It's got different tracking modes on it. As well, and I think, yeah,
It's got a star, a sun, and a lunar tracking mode, and then it's got multiple times, because sometimes people are taking multiple images and wanting the scope to actually track across the sky.
So it's like you just select the sun mode and press the button.
yeah, and if you have another telescope and you want to use it for nighttime shots, then you just select the appropriate tracking right here. Nicely,
All right, so this is going to be booked out as of today, and but it'll be available later on in the summer, and that's basically when you're outside doing stuff. Very, very handy scope. All right,
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, now we are at the break. So I think we're at a wonderful venue to take advantage of the break, and I think we have some refreshments there where we're actually allowed to bring them in for a meeting for a change. So we'll see everybody back, I guess, in about 20 minutes or so. No, he's one of the renowned eclipse experts we have, both in the province and nationally across Canada. He's internationally, actually, and we're very fortunate to have him here tonight to talk about the red planet. Thank you, Jake.
I walked in here tonight, I thought to myself, you know, because there's a lot of old guys here, most people are gonna know this story. And then I started thinking about it. If you aren't 65 years old, this is gonna be new to you, at least some parts of it. Because that's about 70 years ago is when we started actually getting serious about Mars, or at least moved into the modern era where we started sending spacecraft up to. So I borrowed a couple of Mike's pictures along the way. This is sort of state of the art for amateurs right now. And we'll go into that. It's good for comparison because as time goes on in this talk, you'll see how the evolution of our ability to image Mars changed along the way. And then I want it to do something.
The third button down should advance your slide.
Yeah. No, not. Okay, how do we get locked up?
Oh, I'm just gonna.
Here we go. Okay, there we go. I don't know what I did, but it worked. So the name Mars is not one that has horribly ancient beginnings to it. It was Nergal once for the god of war in Babylon. The story goes is that it's associated with the god of war because it's red, and it's quite obviously red, as we've seen with the recent close approach. The Greeks, so there's a lot of borrowing back and forth of gods in those days, and they just gave them a new name. So the Greek gave it Ares, which is where we get Antares, which is a star, which is kind of like the opposition to Mars, but which is also the same color. So the star Antares is also a very red star. And the Romans, they already had god of war named Mars, so they said, oh, that must be Ares. And so they borrowed legends back and forth between them, or at least borrowed from the Greeks. He was also the father of Romulus and Remus, who were the founders of Rome in legend. But of course, these stories have many different tellings. And so in some legends, he was the father of the ones that founded Rome. It was a difficult planet for the ancients because it had one of the biggest retrograde motions. As we passed it in our orbit, Mars would seem to go backwards and then forward again and then backwards again. And that was always a difficult problem to explain for the Greeks to try and derive a mathematical model on how that was happening. It also gets fairly high out of the ecliptic itself, which is another problem as it's solved. But they were certainly capable of making an ephemeris for Mars. It's just that they were willing to accept a forecast that Mars would be over there and instead find it over there. And I would consider that a pretty good prediction. And eventually it was resolving that so that the distance started to close in. But we never really got to a close approximation of the orbit of Mars until Kepler came up with his laws. And even then it took about a century later before people like Halley put it together into a usable mathematical model. Galileo never saw any markings on Mars. What he said is what's up in the top corner there, that he could see it was a planet, that it was round, but he couldn't see any details on it. Not surprising considering his size of his telescope and its magnification. But what you have here is some of the early viewings of it. This one by Fontana in 1638 is the first picture of Mars that I can find in the literature. But you can see that it didn't take very long before telescopes got a little better, and there's quite a bit of increase in resolution. Huygens in 1659 is probably looking at Sirius Major on that one. And Hooke was a pretty good observer, 1666. So, you can see these are spread out a little bit because they're all done when Mars was in opposition, which comes by every 2.5 years. So you sort of get some observations and then you wait 2.5 years and a little bit more telescope development and so on. By the time you get to Cassini here in 1666, you can see that he's drawing similar sorts of patterns to Hooke over here at the same time frame. But nobody was really getting things we could seriously identify as structures that we see now. And particularly with the prominence of Sirius Major, you'd think that at least would show up on all of them. Herschel was one of the ones who started saying, I wonder if there's life on that planet. And he sort of compared here to the Earth, how similar it was to the Earth, but didn't actually say that there were life on it. He just did this supposition here at the bottom. It's sort of assuming there were inhabitants on it, which, given the religious situation of the time, was probably not a good thing to do, because then it brought up questions of whether or not they knew about Jesus and so on and so forth. It's actually a question that's you find being discussed to this day, if we ever find intelligent life in the universe. But Herschel was quick to have other beings on everything that he looked at, Venus and moon, and he wasn't one to put them on the sun, but other people did. So speculating that Mars might have had life on it was not a particularly outrageous point of view at the time. About 1840, that's when we started to get some, I would say, real maps of Mars. The Mater and Beer actually developed a coordinate system for Mars based on Sinus Meridiani, which is the meridian named after it. So they picked a point there and said, okay, that's 0 degrees, and started mapping things out. At that point, other people could sort of see the same structures and draw them. And by the time we get up into 1830 here, we're starting to see some features on Mars that are quite recognizable, especially this feature here, Sinus Meridiani. So they're some of the more prominent things that show up on all of the early maps. Some people didn't do their own. This was Dr. Proctor, but bad name for a doctor, but anyway, he borrowed observations by Dawes. We know Dawes because he's the one that developed the formula for Dawes limit, which tells you the resolution of your telescope, at least that gets close to it. He named a lot of the features on here, so you'll see that there are a particularly large number of English names on here, although he still managed to get some the French Laplace and with the Naismith, Beer, Fontana, Herschel, and what do you know, Dawes himself. So none of these names still exist, partly because this is such a bad map of Mars. So I've tried to find some features that related to what I actually see. It's possible this Herschel Strait here is part of Meridiani, but other than that, there's not even any obvious Sirius Major, which stands out so much in pictures of Mars. The guy that really threw the brick into everything was Giovanni Schiaparelli when he drew this map. And this is one of his later maps. And he's a pretty well respected astronomer. He's got some good bona fides there. He had meteor showers. He matched up the Leonids with Comet Temple Tuttle. Had an asteroid that he discovered, so he had some, but he was also a very good observer of Mars. That was one of his favorite targets, and so he's drawn this map after two oppositions in 82 and 88, 1882 and 88. And you'll notice that many of the lines he's drawn are double. He called them canali, which in Italian means channels, but in the newspapers in New York and beyond got translated as canals. And from then on, we were doomed to consider not only that Mars had intelligent life, but it seemed to prove that Mars had intelligent life. And it was only a matter of time until they started to look for us, or we started to look for them. Edgar Rice Burroughs is probably the one who made it most attractive to have a civilization on Mars. Oh, Burroughs was no slouch. He also had a civilization on the moon and a civilization on Venus. But you can see what he thought about his stories here with this quotation from him on the right-hand side. You'll be familiar with many of his stories. Tarzan of the Apes was his. The Land That Time Forgot, which we probably saw as Journey to the Center of the Earth, and sort of things. He liked to write a few cowboy movies too. And if you ever want to read any of this, you can go to this site here, where you can just download them for typing in their name. There's no registration. They have stuff that's recent. I have no idea how they get by the copyrights. But he wrote 80 novels, and if you want to get thoroughly immersed in Edgar Rice Burroughs, the oceanofpdf.com is the place to do it. Quick download, you do it in ebook format or PDF format. And, they seem to be legal, but I have no idea how.
The copyrights have expired.
Well, he has on these, but you'll find stuff that was written 5 years ago on that too. So either they're ignoring it or they found some trick, or they're hosting it out of Russia. I don't know. So this is the culprit, Percival Lowell. Percival Lowell had two things going for him. And you can see he was a wandering spirit. He was sort of into the occult to some extent. So it wasn't a big step to think about life on Mars. The other thing was he was filthy rich. And put the two of them together, we're finding out recently, that can be dangerous. So he spent a lot of time in his youth wandering around the world, particularly in the Far East. And he finally came back to America and settled down. He started thinking about, I'd like to be an astronomer. And in particular, he started to read about canals on Mars, and then built an enormous telescope for the time and started to immerse himself in the Martian legend, so to speak. You can see that some of his cohorts sort of summed him up as being a sort of sponge for information, but he wouldn't give up on ideas once he latched onto them. And of course, the media were more than happy to give him attention, even though other astronomers were saying, there's nothing there, you just put it together in your head. Some of the drawings that Lowell made at one stage or another, they got more and more exotic as time went on. If you've ever been to Flagstaff, Arizona, you can certainly drop in and have a look at his observatory, his telescope, and all of his records are there and everything else. He's quite well known. And he was also quite willing to fund other studies. He wasn't just saying, well, we're going to have this big telescope and we're just going to look at Mars with it. He was the one that funded the discovery of Pluto, for instance, although that happened after he died. Schiaparelli and Lowell conversed with each other. You can see that Schiaparelli did not buy in entirely that what he was seeing was in signs of intelligent life. He sort of danced around the subject a little bit. And he was certainly able to correspond with Lowell, and the two of them would sort of feed on each other. But Schiaparelli was careful not to come out in print and say that, yeah, there's life on Mars and they're looking at it. This telescope was a beauty in the time, and the observatory itself, which still looks like this, is a beauty in itself. This wonderful, deep wooden roof to it that's extremely attractive. And if you go at the right time, you can actually have a look through this telescope, which Stan and I did, and probably some of the rest of you. You go when they're closing up and there's nobody else around. You go on a Tuesday when nobody is going to be there. And the folks over at Flagstaff now have serious astronomical telescopes that are hosted on other mountains in Arizona that are well away from Flagstaff, where it's dark. I think one of them is run by the Planetary Society in cooperation with it, but it's something like a 3-meter telescope, so it's pretty serious stuff. Tombaugh was probably his biggest achievement, but his telescopes were used for a lot of discoveries about galaxies in days when we thought galaxies were just nebula that were part of our own Milky Way. So even though after Lowell died, the public always had this fascination with Mars, this is sort of what he left us with. You can see that now all its canals are double lines, but you can recognize things. Sirius Major here. You can't see any part very much of Meridianus, Sinus Meridiani, but it's off there on the right edge. But here's what more or less the same view on Mars looks like. And so you sort of say to yourself, well, how the hell did you come up with all of those lines when this much higher resolution image doesn't show any of it? But that's the secret. It's because it's much higher resolution under much lower resolution. Something that wasn't taken from the Mars surveyor, then you could sort of make a case for seeing these lines on things. This is Lowell's nemesis, E.M. Antoniadi. Antoniadi had access to better telescopes or bigger telescopes anyway, than Lowell did, the 32-inch. You can imagine the tragedy here in this. The first time he ever used that telescope was the best view he ever had of Mars. And even though he spent much of the rest of his career looking at Mars through that telescope, he never had as good a view of it as he saw that first time. And his conclusions, and they have quite a bit of correspondence between the two of them, and Antoniadi was no slouch about getting into the media himself and in scientific presentations and saying, you know, this stuff isn't real. This is his map of Mars, and in this you can start to recognize some of the features. Sirius Major here, this is leading on to Sinus Meridiani here. This is Sinus Sagius. And I'll show you later pictures on how prominent it is. And you can see that white or that pink heart-shaped area up high under the polar cap would be Hellas, which is a big low-lying area, the lowest area on Mars, full of sand and things like that. Lowell took photographs through, because these are taken in 1939. So here you can see this is Sinus Meridiani here, and Sinus actually, Sagius in here, and Sirius Major. So there's no canals on this. This is the state of the art at the time. Even so, Antoniadi pointed out to him that the pictures you take look more like what I draw on Mars than what you draw on Mars, but he died unconvinced. And it's probably just as well he died before spacecraft started going. I'll come back to Mike's pictures again, in particular this one. Can you see all the modeling on the surface here? These are all just changes in albedo. They generally represent differences between rougher areas and smoother areas on Mars. But you can imagine somebody who would never see Mars as clear as this visually, but somebody seeing those faint markings pop into view every now and then and stringing them together to make canal shapes, or at least linear shapes. Not so much on this major hemisphere here. But you know, they see the little cloud patches in that, they would have noticed those, and Mars changes a lot, its albedo. You sort of think that you look at these maps from the satellites and say, boy, that's pretty static, but no, it doesn't. In the dust storms, there's an enormous amount of movement of dust that masks features, and then they're uncovered again over the years as the winds blow the dust off of them. So you can get quite substantial albedo changes if you're careful and you monitor it over the number of years. So back in the 1950s, this probably represented the best quality pictures that you could get of Mars. And these are from Lowell Observatory and from Mount Palomar, a much bigger telescope, 200-inch. Compare that to the ones that Mike has taken, and you can see that technology has certainly done an awful lot. I think Lowell would have changed his mind if he'd been able to do it. In planning for the Mariner mission, the first spacecraft to go to Mars, this is the map that the US Air Force used in its planning. And the lines are still there, but they've been de-emphasized. It's upside down from some of the other ones. So here's Meridiani Sinus, Sabius Sinus. They've changed names recently because there's no point in calling something Lacus something or other when you know there's no lakes there. So they give it a different, and they maintain the principal name, but so you won't find exactly these names on the thing. The Hellas Basin here, which we could see in the other pictures. That's a big low-lying area in here. Sirius Major. The eye can fool, I guess. So we send Mariner 4, 1965. 65. 60 years ago. Those of you who weren't old enough to remember in those times, the fascination with this spacecraft as it was launched and following it to Mars and waiting for those very first pictures, everybody saying, are the canals real? We're going to finally find out if there's a civilization. Nobody paid any attention to the scientists. There's no civilization there. It's got almost no atmosphere and it's bloody cold. And everybody's saying, what are the canals? And back comes a string of pictures like this. Now, this is a fly pass. So the spacecraft goes past Mars, takes a strip of pictures, and it's gone. And what does it do? It looks like the moon. 3 months before. This is what the National Academy of Sciences said in the United States. And what everybody else said when it got back. It looks like the moon. It was a huge PR upset because people wanted to see life on Mars. And I can remember being hugely disappointed when those pictures came out on the newspaper that there wasn't even a hint. But they did point out that they only took a strip of pictures across the planet, you know, and we missed a lot of stuff. I mean, they knew where the spacecraft took the pictures and realizing all these other parts and pieces on Mars that they had missed them. So what they got was the rough terrain on Mars. Well, a few years later came Mariner 6 and 7. They were also flyby missions, but they were a little better planned. They could take more pictures, both on approach and they, obviously, you can see compared to the other ones, that there's much higher resolution. Once again, they missed the parts of Mars that we think are the most interesting. But they got enough of it that they could say no canals at all. It only took 201 pictures. I'll show you where they took them. But it did establish some characteristics of Mars that were important. Because one of the problems they had with Mars was what is the surface pressure? And they were estimating 35, 40, 50 millibars at the surface. Surface pressure on the Earth is 1,000 millibars. So it's still a very small pressure, but it was enough that you could drop a lander onto the surface with a parachute. Had to be a big parachute. But with 6 and 7 millibar surface pressures, you're not going to be able to do it with a parachute. Now, since then, they've done it with parachutes and retro rockets. They've had a rocket that winched the lander down, and they've had one that they cut off the rockets and then just let it fall and bounce onto the surface. So there's a lot of mechanisms to get down there. But in those days, both the Russians and the Americans were wondering just what they were going to encounter. So here's where the high resolution images were on Mars. And these are where the far encounter wide angle images were. So they mapped a fair bit of the surface of Mars, but they got most of it in this sort of dark terrain and nothing up in this light terrain up in here. About the same time, the Soviets also started sending stuff. In 71, both Mariner 9 and Mars 2 and 3. Mars 1 and a couple of others had failed on the way, so the 2 and 3 were the first Soviet missions to get there. They were all flypasts, and oh no, sorry, they weren't. They were orbiters. But there was a huge dust storm on Mars that started up while they were en route, and it was a planet-wide one, and it buried everything. Those are the 3 of the tallest mountains on Mars, and that's all you can see. The Soviets' program was automatic. So it got to Mars, went into orbit, and started taking pictures. So they could suspend those, but they used up an awful lot of their capability on photographing dust. And in those days, they took a picture with a film camera, developed it and scanned it on the spacecraft and sent the signal back to Earth. At least the Soviets did. So you only had the Tharsis volcanoes. They both had landers. It was really innovative at the time, and that was a real challenge. But remember, the Soviets were also landing on Venus at the time. The Mars 2 lander didn't work, burned out. Mars 3 lander actually succeeded, landed on the surface. You could see it going down through the atmosphere. Then it cut out. They got some measurements down through the atmosphere. Back in 2012, they found what they think are the pieces of that lander. And they all look like they deployed properly on the surface. And in fact, there's some indications that there's the cables between 2 of them. The retro rockets and the lander itself, the heat shield and so on and so forth. So there's some suspicion that this seems to be, and it's all deployed the way it was supposed to be. Perfect landing and no signal. Well, shouldn't say exactly no signal. It's landed and it sent this signal. 14 seconds transmission before it did have what something will several a couple of 100 seconds of transmission through the atmosphere, like I mentioned. But then they not only did they have a lander, but they had a rover. And this thing sort of shuffled along like this, and it couldn't go very far, like a few meters. He said the parachute didn't deploy, that's what they thought, but we saw from the other image that it looked like everything deployed properly. It just. Oh, no, that was Mars 2, Mars 3 is the one here. Yeah, this, one of the things you don't think about too much is that in some of these things that came straight in from the Earth, didn't go into orbit, you had to know exactly where Mars was. And they didn't have that good an ephemeris in those days, especially in the very earliest probes. So they would fire off a probe to Mars and it would miss by a few hundred more miles than they expected, and they couldn't handle that. But they got, eventually the Americans and Russians started to share the ephemeris and measuring, my spacecraft is in orbit, I know exactly where Mars is. Once that happened, you could calculate its exact position. So there's the first digital something from Mars. You imagine the disappointment having that come down and stop after 14 seconds from your lander. But they made some discoveries. They found some of the highest volcanoes, that would be Olympus Mons at 22 kilometers. They got an idea of the surface temperature range. They got a better measurement of the surface pressure. But of course, surface pressure on Mars depends critically on where you are, whether you're at high altitude or low. It also depends on the season, as we'll see later. And they were able to make up some topographic maps from the data that they did have. You can see a haze layer there in the great white picture on the bottom. So not really sharp images, but enough to work with. Oops, I want to go back. Oh, you might see this one. Well, let's get her going. If I can back us up one first, okay. In the 1970s, so they sent Mars 4, 5, and 6, and 7 all at once. Just sort of bang, 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 bang. So they were all launched in July and August of 73. 2 were flybys with landers, and 2 were orbiters. Unfortunately, the Russians knew ahead of time that the outfit that was making their transistors were making flawed transistors. Apparently, it substituted aluminum for gold in certain of the contacts. They tested them and said, well, they start to fail after about 18 months, which was longer than the time to get to Mars. But we're going to take a chance anyway because the failure rate is only around 40 or 50%. Well, it was a bad gamble, as you can see here. The retro rockets didn't work on this, so we just went by and took 12 images. Mars 5 didn't work for very long. Transistors failed. It took 180 images, but only 43. Mars 6 lost telemetry, couldn't communicate with Earth, but it was automated. So it went on to Mars, did a successful flyby. The landing module separated, transmitted 224 seconds of data, and then the transistors failed or something. So it gave you a nice profile of the atmosphere, nothing on the surface. And Mars 7 lander, it separated, but its retro rockets didn't fail. It just burned up at the atmosphere. I mean, a hugely ambitious program, 4 Mars probes at once, and none of them worked perfectly, but Mars 5 did give them some time in orbit, and one of the landers at least gave them an atmospheric profile. This is what one of the flyby instruments looked like in a picture from the spacecraft. So let's hear.
Does that have audio?
It has audio, but it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Because it's in Russian, probably.
This is about 10 minutes long. I'm not sure if I'll let it all go through, but it's all it got captions. So this would have been issued.
I know, so.
Lost in translation.
Oh, the great opposition. That's when Mars is the biggest thing.
You know, they use quite elliptical orbits on the spacecraft. They didn't circularize them as much as we do nowadays. Even with the heavier rockets that the Russians had, it was difficult for them to fit everything they wanted to do in the weight limit that they had. In this movie, they only talk about 2 of the 4 spacecraft. Six months to Mars with transistors that failed on an average at 1 to 1.5 years. But of course, those transistors have been sitting in that spacecraft for quite some time while it was being constructed. The very well written account published by NASA, but written by one of the Russian scientists that developed this. And you could see the infighting between all of the departments, the people that made the chips saying, oh, there's nothing wrong with our chips, and the people that use them saying these chips are crummy. No, it's all laid out in about 20 pages. Even the Soviets weren't immune from the canal legend.
I love that the film is literally somebody flipping through photographs.
It was suggesting active volcanoes here, or the dust storm. I guess red dust would get it for that. You'll notice that they talk about Mars 4 and 5, but they've gone back to Mars 2 and 3 for the discussion here about dust storms, because they admit that there were problems with the Mars 4 through 7.
Good three were launched simultaneously. They looked like one was following the other. You know, one.
Yeah, they were launched
Like a week apart.
They were actually launched before Mariner 9, but Mariner 9 was on a faster trajectory. Anyway, the reason for this is mostly to show you what the thinking was, to sort of compress what I've said so far and how much it affected what was being developed and sent off as probes. The calculation of argon was something that they derived from one of the pumps on one of the landers that were sending back information before it failed. And they calculated there had to be 35% argon in the atmosphere in order for the pump to have had to work as hard as it did. And it turns out that was wrong. It's closer to 2% argon in the atmosphere.
You have any comments on the competition between USSR and the United States? Like, were they just like with the moon, were they competing as far as Mars was concerned?
Yeah, they were competing on everything. The Russians had great success at Venus because they landed 2 probes onto Venus's surface.
Mhm.
They only worked for 15 minutes, but that was because of the heat. But the only pictures we have from the surface of Venus came from, I think, 4 Mars landers or 4 Soviet landers. So they're just going on to explain what we saw, but you can see the images are reasonably decent. Don't know how much they are true to life, things like that. This is an interesting observation here. They're talking about channels that look like rivers on the earth. This is with this sort of era is when we began to see these channels and start to speculate about, well, maybe there wasn't life now, but there could have been in the past. But at this stage, nobody's suggesting any civilizations would have been building. One of the characteristics of the search for life on Mars is it gets smaller and smaller and smaller the longer we go to Mars. So now we're down to microscopic stuff and maybe some fungus or something like that. And here we are speculating that Mars will come back to life again when conditions get ready, and this, again, they're only showing microscopic life or a little bit more than microscopic. This I find interesting. 20 million years ago, the last time, and now they're speculating about some future time when it'll come back. Looks like an awful lot like pond water I used to look at when I was a kid. So anyway, there you have the Soviet approach. Mariner 9 got in just a little bit ahead of them by a few weeks. It was the first spacecraft to orbit, and it sent back a lot of pictures, mapped 85% of it, and so on and so forth. Mars became interesting after Mariner 9, and we weren't just looking at places where something had splashed in. I put this speculation about civilization largely ended, but then of course we have a face on Mars that went on for some time afterwards. Viking landers came next. The Americans sent 2. They had an orbiter with each one and a lander, and they were very successful. The orbiters gave us a lot of pictures, mapped almost all of Mars, but the landers gave us what Mars looked like on the surface. And by now, that sort of scene is very, very familiar. But again, like the first Mars trips, these were fascinating, waiting for getting the first pictures from the surface of Mars, just to make sure, well, maybe something green will be looking at us when we get there. So here's a map of all of the successes and failures, and you can see here that the first Mariner success was, these are all Russian failures here, and then a US failure. So the Russians back in 1960 were trying to get something onto Mars. And then as you go along, partial successes are in yellow, success is green. There's a lot of successes up in here, operational, but these 3 here are actually just flyby missions that are getting a gravity boost from Mars. So in effect, the operational satellites on Mars, there's about 4 or 5 of them right now. And there are many people, China, the United Arab Emirates, Japan. Failures are getting beat. So I'm going to change subject here and just go on and take a little bit about Mars itself. This is the albedo map for Mars. This is the best map I've found taken by satellites that shows Mars the way it might appear through Mike's images, for instance. So you start to see Sirius Major here really does show up. Canis Sagius and Canis Meridiani here, they sort of have the shape that you see when you look through a telescope. And then, but basically the main difference on Mars is that the flat sandy areas tend to be light colored and the rough areas tend to be dark colored. And when you look at the map, with the topography in it, you can see this Hellas Basin here, very, very low. And you can see the volcanoes over here, Olympus Mons, the highest volcano. When you got, the big interesting thing about Mars is how the northern part of Mars is very, very smooth. And the southern part is very rough. And that's why that is, we don't know. Valles Marineris here, the size go across the United States, a huge, deep canyon. And this and the low elevation here, what could cause that? Probably something smacking into it. I showed you a picture here where you can sort of see corresponding low resolution Earth view of the same area. The plateaus, the Tarsus region is quite some interest. Olympus Mons is 22 kilometers high, and so there is an area of very high volcanic activity, because when you look at this from, this is Olympus Mons, the huge outflows from that to considerably raise the terrain on all of that area. The atmospheric composition, we all know, is CO2 for the most part, a little bit of nitrogen and argon. Other than that, there's a water vapor, 0.03%. In spite of that, Mars quite often has 100% relative humidity because it's so cold. And these are Viking or American probes that measure the atmosphere, but the troposphere is generally regarded as the weather layer of a planet. You see it's 40 kilometers high. That's 4 times higher than the troposphere on the Earth. Mars' thin atmosphere also means that its different features are much higher in the atmosphere. Here we're looking at humidity and temperature measurements, and humidity is in blue. You can see that it gets up, in this case, to 50% in here. Temperatures get up into 60, up a little bit over 0 each day. This is just 3 days in Mars' atmosphere, but it behaves like the Earth. The humidity goes up at night and the temperature goes down, and vice versa. Surface pressure changes because Mars gets so cold in the southern hemisphere winter that this carbon dioxide freezes out of the atmosphere, so the atmosphere becomes thinner and the pressure drops. At the same time, you have daily pressure variation. These are just one day at 2 different days. But you see the pressure drops during the day. Well, it's actually not fixed. This rise and fall will change. And it's just caused by thermal tides in the atmosphere, the warming of the atmosphere and the ground, particularly by the sun each day. There's a lot of clouds on Mars, and they look a lot like Earth clouds. This could very easily be on Earth. You wouldn't be able to breathe. This one wouldn't be. There's a big dust storm here, but we also have these wave clouds that are coming off of some kind of a peak over here along the edges of the polar cap. You get cirrus-looking clouds. Here's some more wave clouds. This is the air that's flowing over top of this little barrier here, and as it does, it sets up a series of waves. And as the air rises in the waves, the water vapor condenses, and this goes down, it clears up. And we see these every day on the Earth. A lot of fog in the valley, Valles Marineris there. That's a nightly event. We get low pressure storms. Here's a storm on Mars, and another one, which is a dust storm, all wound up into a spiral. Here's the same kind of storm on Earth. We call these comet clouds. And you can look at any picture, satellite picture of the Earth on any day and see them in it. So that means that Mars has low pressure systems and frontal systems as well that are associated. Now these form along the north polar cap, so we've got a lot of cold air up here and warmer air here, so got all the right conditions for developing that kind of a little storm. We get orographic clouds. Here's a flow over RASC Monthly. This is quite a common cloud. It forms every day, lasts through the morning and then breaks loose and dissipates downwind. You can see this other picture here from water clouds. These are over the Tharsis volcano, but they have a bluish color in them in the processing that they've done. But they're so common there because they're orographic clouds. But when you look at this, clouds are actually everywhere on Mars. They're not always that prominent because these thin blue ones would be hard to see. You see right through them. But the planet itself has quite a bit of cloud in it if you've got the right wavelengths and sensors. And if you're sitting in orbit above it. The dust storms, there's a lot to be said about dust storms. They're huge, but for the most part, they don't come by continent or globally until every several years, say 2, 3, 4 years. Other than that, they tend to be a little smaller than that. They're caused by wind, of course, but you have to sort of think a little bit about the wind. You know, you see the movie, where the camp on Mars is destroyed by the wind, but look at the comparison here. That there is so thin. So you can imagine how tiny those dust particles must be to be picked up and given a global dust storm with a 12 or 15 kilometer an hour wind. One of the major things for putting dust into the air is dust devils, and they're all over on Mars. And here's an image that shows the track of dust devils. Just because they disturb the surface and expose darker soil underneath. So here's a picture from Perseverance rover. It shows one here and 2 of them over here. They're pretty common. Estimating 1 per day per square kilometers. Now I've seen places that have that kind. In other parts of Arizona, for instance, they'll often have days with a lot of dust devils that would probably be higher than that. But to have it sort of more or less globally, that's pretty incredible. A lot of dust floating. Polar caps, water ice with a CO2 ice cap, that's in the north. Oh, well, in the south, generally. The North Pole has more water ice than carbon dioxide ice. The reverse is true in the South Pole. That's because the South Pole is actually colder than in the winter in the north. And we'll also get snow. Well, in this case, snow would be carbon dioxide, probably. It's all a question of temperature because water will freeze out much more quickly than carbon dioxide. You can see the way the ice caps grow and fade back between summer and winter. And there's some layers in the ice cap if you look in the right places, and each one of these layers tells you something about the climate of Mars, and that's still being deciphered. Because it's cold here and warm here, where you get warm and cold together, you tend to get storms forming. So we have a dust storm here, and it looks like another one here with a little bit of a low pressure system just forming on the edge of the ice cap, where the cold and the warm interact same way as it does over top of us when we get big storms. The rovers are interesting. They give us beautiful pictures, but this one's been processed to give you the lovely blue sky, which NASA quit doing a number of years ago, but other people don't. I've shown you 4 of the landers here. I'm not going to go into those in any detail. I'll show you some pictures of the scenes for each one of them. But you can see mostly what they're doing is checking out measured presence of organic molecules. Organic molecules are found everywhere in the universe. And yet we always seem to be surprised when we find organic molecules. You can look in the middle of the Orion Nebula, there's organic molecules. Why wouldn't there be organic molecules on Mars? But everybody gets excited when it's, oh, we saw some organic. More important is probably evidence they find with past water. And that generally tends to be in things like sulfates and stuff like this. these blueberries, which were made, they've had this seasonal methane release, that it's very, very low levels of methane. They say only thing that can do that is humans. Until the geologists say, hey, wait a minute, not humans, but like the geologists say, wait a minute, and you can do it this way too. So methane might be something important, but it comes and goes and it's extremely low levels. So here we are, Sojourner, which is the first guy that rolled out. You can see it with its lander and the ramp that it went down. I don't know, here he is here, checking out the rock, that little tiny guy, this big. And then you get to Opportunity, again, blue skies here, but you can see the differences in terrain, and each one of these is telling the geologist something. But everywhere you see the presence of dust, which is turned blue in this instead of red. This is, it's actually rust, hematite, and oxidized iron. And it's very, very shallow. You get a little bit different, sort of wide open plains, but with some outcroppings. They love layers. I like to go through the layers and check each one of them. Sometimes just with camera, other times by going right up to them and drilling them or blasting them with a laser. Jezero Crater Perseverance is actually, I've been climbing up where it landed here. It's gone to the top of those hills. Here's a picture from the top of the hill looking back down in. It's actually gone over the rim of the crater that was in. And it's starting down the other side to have a look at what's going on. They get a lot better views if they didn't stop to look at rocks all the time. And then we have the Chinese lander. There's not much being said about it. They seem to have picked a rather unfortunate area of the land. There's not a lot of interesting topography there, more like dirt and little bits of rock. It's flat. Well, we haven't completely given up on. First of all, we can see here on the left, we've got this sort of a crab-like thing that wants to examine this boot-like thing. And then we've got this little thing looking out from behind the rock at us. And of course, how could you miss fortresses like that? In Hollywood, they're still doing it. But hey, it's good fun. Anyway, thanks. I think we're late enough. I don't have to.
Well, there's questions. I mean, the food's coming down.
Now you know as much as I do. But the excitement in those first days, when they first went past Mars and sent back the pictures, more even than Pluto was, because we never expected life on Pluto.
Thanks very much, James.
You're welcome.
Okay, and for those of you who are staying, we should be on its way. I don't smell the tear yet.
Sounds great.
We can hang around and.